in our special feature is our first video game memory. Now, we're all old, so these are actually games that it would have come out way before a lot of people who are listening to the show were born, which is kind of wild when you think about it.
This is
Maybe, actually,
No, definitely, Mike.
This is equivalent of like old men going for a last camping trip and gathering around the bonfire and telling stories.
Back in my day.
I have been honestly. This is the kind of segment that This is the reason why I wanted to do this whole show.
Yes.
and can I just say how funny that is?
I don't want to talk about news.
This is how funny this is, Winnie, because
myself.
I just unilaterally said last week that we're going to talk about this week because I was like, oh, we've got nothing to say in the final segment to say what we're talking about next week. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to pull out a special feature. All right, it's going to be this one.
Well, when we were coming up with ideas for the whole Big Week in Gaming podcast, we're like, okay, these are the kind of, cool features we want to do, things that we really want to talk about. And one of them was, hey, talk about our first gaming memories, the kind of games that we grew up playing, the first few games that we ever remember. That's the kind of stuff.
Wait, first gaming memories or memories?
Shut up. So how do we want to cover this? Because I
have to redo my notes.
I will literally do like 100 different games. And it was kind of cool actually thinking about it this week because I was like, oh, I remember this and I remember when this came out and just like all this really cool things. Do we want to limit it to like 3 games?
No, not at all. I think we need I think we each tell whatever story we want to tell about what we grew up, the very early years of our gaming and the things that were really important to us.
Yep. All right, well, maybe I'll just start and then I'm not going to finish, but I'll like throw the first one. Because if I said the very first gaming memory, so this is like legitimately the first time I ever remember a video game. It was, and this is how old I am. It's the Atari 2600.
Yeah.
Which we owned. And very, I think, in style of Intergot, instead of having like a legit game, it was like a clone dodgy game called, and I think I've mentioned it once before on the potty, it was called Mousetrap. So it's like basically a Pac-Man clone where you play as a mouse and you're getting chased by cats, right? And very much like Pac-Man. I think it's better than the Pac-Man Atari 2600 game, by the way. And it has like a bit of a different sort of appeal to it because you press a button to sort of open and close. If you imagine a Pac-Man sort of puzzle map, but more like, 4x3 style. And, in the bottom left, right, and top left, right corners of the map, there's kind of like, they've put doors in, like an alternating doors. So you press a button, it sort of like alternates which side will be open. Other than that, it's pretty much exactly like Pac-Man. I remember when I first saw that, my dad was playing it, and I was like really young. Like I would imagine like 4 or something like that. And I was just like mesmerized. I was like, what is this? This is insane. I can control this. Like it like blew my little brain apart. And I was like, wow. And I had to play it and I got good at it. And I just loved that so much. So that was my very first gaming memory.
So you say 2600, just to clarify, because there's a few, like from what I've seen, there's a few different models. Was yours the black one with like the rainbow strip in the front?
Yeah, it was definitely the black one.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to look at images. It definitely wasn't the really cool kind of like wood, chestnut one. That would have been sick. Yeah, it was definitely. It's like this black one, like very. I've got an image of it. I'll send it to you guys. It's like if you go to the Wikipedia article on it, I think it's.
Oh, I know what it looks like. I know what it looks like.
That was the one. They call it the Darth Vader design. That was the one that we had. Yeah. How about you, Swinny? What's your first memory?
Oh, so we're going to go around. Okay.
Well, I'm going to come back later.
Yeah, okay. All right. So
we'll loop back.
My very first gaming memory that I at least can recall is also the Atari 2600. It is also the black one with like the metallic rainbow strip. That was my first video game console ever. And the first game I remember ever playing on it was Defender. Defender was probably my first game ever, I think. We had a few games, so it's hard to know exactly which one I, picked up first. We did also have a really cool educational game called Cookie Monster Munch.
I had that as well, dude.
Yeah, and
dude, what the hell? I would never have been able to say what that was until you said it.
And
that's so crazy.
You have the control that has the number buttons on it.
That's so crazy, dude. I had that shit.
That controller was called the Atari Kids controller, and it came with, you could get different overlays. So there was one that was like a Cookie Monster one. I think we had another game, but I couldn't remember what it was. And that was really cool because, like, honestly, that Cookie Monster game had some really cool, like, massive sprite work for the Atari.
Yeah.
It was really, really neat. And some of the other Atari games that were, part of, those early console days was we had some version of Pong. I don't know if it was Pong or like one of the million clones they probably made. But the other game that is just so fondly burnt into my brain and I still think holds up is River Raid.
Oh, yeah.
River Raid is just one of the best Atari games ever made. So thank you, Activision.
River Raid's good. And just like the other Atari one that I'll mention is Pitfall. Yeah. So I was at my now late grandfather's farm and, I wasn't madly into gaming. I was very little, but I remember seeing Pitfall at their house and I think my cousin playing it. And then I played it a bit. I'm like, wow, this game is so cool. And I still think that game is one of the few Atari games that still holds up. Like, if you play it even today, it's still a really cool game.
So, like at friends' houses, so you got Pitfall, of course, Adventure. I used to play that.
I've never played that.
The Smurfs game, which was actually a pretty good platformer. And unfortunately, also E.T.
Oh, you've actually seen a copy of E.T. in the wild. Cool.
Well, yeah, as a kid, yeah.
Nice. How about you, Mike?
Atari as well, I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, I'm pretty sure it was Atari because, and I mean, it shows our age, but I think that was actually still relatively late. I mean, this was in the early 90s would have been. That would have had these experiences late 80s. I don't know. I only had it in the very early 90s.
Without doxing all ourselves, right now, like you're basically our age. It makes no difference, but you're actually a few years younger than us, which kind of does make a difference for back then, because you would have been in like communist place in Europe.
I did, where we had no games.
Exactly. Yeah. And then you would have left there and you were in New Zealand for a while.
So actually my first experience wasn't there. My first gaming experience that I can possibly remember was in Germany. So we were poor, filthy immigrants in Germany back in the early 90s, and we couldn't afford an Atari or anything like that. But some neighbor in the place we were living, because it was a converted hotel that someone had bought and turned into units. Oh, yeah. And I remember living with my parents in just a 1-bedroom unit. So I'd sleep in a corner, they'd sleep somewhere else in another corner. They could probably only get frisky when I was at school. And I remember that.
That's why you're a single child.
That's why I'm a single child, exactly. They never had a chance to do it again. And I remember we had a neighbor who was this gypsy dude. No joke, a gypsy dude, because he was from Romania and he had an Atari. And I remember a cowboy game where you had like, and I looked it up. This could go bad. There was a cacti, there was a cactus, and there were like 2 cowboys, one on each side, and you had to go up and down and shoot each other.
Oh, okay. I'm glad it didn't go to Wales.
No, that was it. It was just that one. And
it's
I think
Germany as well.
I know exactly, in Germany. I think the game was called Outlaw. And I looked it up since, and I'm pretty sure it was on the Atari 2600.
Sure it's not
Custer's Revenge.
yeah.
No, it was not that. But here's the interesting thing. Because I didn't have one myself, I remember thinking it was cool, but I wasn't hooked or anything like that. Because I would spend so much time outside, climbing trees and running around and playing with kids outside, that it didn't really click for me at the time. I was like, yeah, this is cool. I mean, I don't remember exactly what I thought because it's so long ago, but I remember not being hooked. I don't remember asking my parents to go and play it every day or anything like that. It was cool, but I was like, yeah, I've got other things to do, like climbing trees and shit. So, but that was definitely the very first memory. But things changed after that. So over to you guys.
Well, yeah, and just going off that point about, getting hooked, because I wasn't hooked on the Atari either. It was cool, but I do think actually the Atari doesn't hold up as well as the next one I was going to mention, which is Super Mario Brothers on the NES, which, we've had a previous segment just about how much it's selling for now. So this is like the first game that I was like, wow, I just love this game. And I reckon I was in grade 1 or prep, or like right at the start of school. And this started a lifetime of deceits and sneakiness that like I love this game so much, and I'm so bad at the game, to be honest, but I love this game so much that actually my brain, my little kid brain of 5 or 6 years old, I was like, I want to play this game more, but how can I play this game more? And then I was like, wait a second, when I'm sick, I can stay at home and play games. So I just need to be sick to be able to play the game.
Ding, ding,
and I remember
ding.
saying to my mum, I'm like, oh, I'm sick. I'm sick. I have to stay at home. She's like, oh, okay, just stay at home then. And my mum worked night shifts. Like my mum's like kind of crazy actually. Like when I look back and think she worked all the way through the night and then kind of was like for us, like a stay at home mom. Because she'd always be awake when we're awake.
That's crazy.
Right? And she would sleep during the day, like when we're at school, effectively for like 4 or 5 hours and then do housework and everything. She was crazy, right? Shout out to my mum. But, like, so she was asleep and I was playing this game like all day. And I'm like, this is genius. And I think that put a seed into my brain of being dodgy.
Figured it out.
But yeah, like Super Mario Brothers, what can you say? It's like one of the greatest games ever. I totally understand when people put it as the number one game of all time just because of its impact. Probably more so in a way in America because they went through the whole video game crash and this game kind of brought back gaming, and who knows when it would have come back. It would have come back eventually. Still holds up, this game. Still one of the most popular speed running games that's out there. A fantastic game. I loved it. It's just it was so like it kind of started me on that journey of being a gamer. Like this really put its hooks into me. I really loved it. How about you, Sunny?
Yeah, so the NES in general was a huge part of my childhood, but I never owned one. So I guess that it requires a bit of explanation. So back in my old childhood home, we had very good neighbors, and our families are still very close to this day. So much so that one of the neighbors actually has officiated like funerals for us and stuff. Like that's how close we are to that family. And we used to go, like I used to be around there like multiple times a week playing their NES. And it's like, in hindsight, I'm so thankful for them to basically give me the opportunity as a kid to be able to play Super Mario Brothers, Zelda 2, Donkey Kong Jr., Duck Hunt, Turtles. Like they even had Little Red Hood, which was an unlicensed game, and so that was those games in particular, that group of games, that was like my education into gaming. Like I loved the Atari, but that's when I knew that this is something special. This is something that is just going to be such an important hobby of mine, and there's just something about those games. Like even Donkey Kong Jr., like even that game is just like such fond memories about sitting down in their lounge room playing that on their big TV, because we only had a tiny little TV at home, and as I said, we only had like Cookie Monster, Munch, and Defender and stuff initially. But then we would hire out an NES, and so I got to play things like Mario Brothers 2, Mega Man 2, even games like Silent Scope, which had no idea how to play, like semi-open world submarine sim on an NES. But hey, I was like 7 years old. I was like happy to play anything. So the NES is very important to me. But there is something that there is another, I guess, like a third tier of my gaming memories that I think we'll probably all get to soon as well. So Mike, I don't know if that then leads into what your next memories are.
It does, but unlike you guys, and because we've spoken about this before, I never had a NES or access to a NES. I mean, I briefly did when I lived in New Zealand through a friend, but again, it was really brief, and I wasn't really playing games as actively back then. But during that period, and sort of before and during that period, I had access to a 386. So I think that's really when I started playing games a lot. And one of the first games that I remember, we've spoken about this one before, is Gorillas. It was the Q Basic game called Gorillas that came out in like 1991. where you had a couple of gorillas and you had to enter in the angle and the speed at which you throw a banana.
I think we've had a lengthy discussion about this on a completely separate podcast a long time ago.
So anyway, back to that old chestnut, the Q Basic Gorillas game. So I grew up with PCs during that era. So I had a 386, and then we got our hands on a 486. But even on the 386, I remember games like there was a game called Superplex, where you were like this red orange blob thing eating electronics and stuff like that. There was Prince of Persia, which a lot of people played, and I remember that immensely. There was Lemmings. I remember spending so many hours in Lemmings.
Oh, Lemmings! I used to go to the library to play that.
It was such a good game. I remember games like Flashback, which to this day is still an amazing looking game. There's a version on Switch that I highly recommend now. So they not the remake of it, but the original one you can get on Switch as well now, which is really cool. And I might actually get back into it and play it because I never played it properly recently. Games like Jill of the Jungle, Gods, and they remastered Gods recently as well.
I didn't know you knew about that game.
Gods.
That's cool.
Oh yeah, man! Like there's so many of those games. I played like hundreds of those games during that era because you would get them. You know, I can probably openly say this, but you know, my mom had a couple of people she worked with and stuff who would just give me floppy disks full of games.
Oh yeah.
So I would have access to all these just libraries of games. But it was interesting because I still had unlike in later years, I felt like I still had a really good balance. Like I'd played quite a bit. But at the same time, it still felt like I would go outside a lot, climb trees, do all that shit. It was amazing. And some other notable mentions. I think there's four more that I'd like to mention. One is Dangerous Dave. I don't know if you guys ever played that one. It was a side-scroller shooter dude, a guy with a shotgun going to this like haunted mansion. Commander Keen, of course. So all of the Commander Keens I played, including the one in Dreamworld, which is a bit different, but still there. And one game that I really, really fondly remember that so deserves a remake of some sort is The Incredible Machine.
Oh, yeah.
Did you guys ever play that?
Yeah, that game, and I don't know why, but those type of games have not made a comeback.
They need to make a comeback. They're so cool, and the ideas. You know, you were talking about dreams earlier. You know, the idea of constructing a world and stuff like that. Okay, it's nothing of the sort in terms of its complexity, but it was still that idea that you would construct your own things. You weren't just playing a game; you were actually making part of the game in that sense.
Well, they've been taken over a lot by, I guess, like the factory building style genre, like Factorio and stuff.
But it's a bit of a different thing, though.
It is, but I think
it is different. Yeah,
but I think that what they do is they kind of occupy a similar space of setting things up to be in cycles and things like that. But I know what you're saying.
It'd just be perfect for the Switch. Imagine like a modern day.
I feel like that's what
Incredible
we should rename
Machine
the show
on the
to.
Switch.
Perfect for the Switch.
Perfect for the Switch. And last but not least, I thought I'll save the best memory for last. There was a game that I will never forget, and it was called Sextras. And that's probably
straight out there. Didn't it's like
the biggest impact on my life out of almost any game. And that's because Sextras, and look, I'll openly talk about it. It's probably quite obvious what it is, but basically it was just Tetris, and every time you got a line, it would reveal part of an image. And you can imagine what those images would be. Now, they weren't super duper bad. It was basically something you'd see in really softcore Playboy stuff. Like, there wasn't full nudity or anything like that.
It wouldn't even be like R-rated these days, would it?
No, it wouldn't even be R-rated, but like an MA15 kind of game if it came out nowadays. It wasn't anything that bad. There was, by the way, a Porntress, which I had also played, and being the age that I was,
he's made it even worse somehow.
It made absolutely no sense to me at the time. I remember my my mom's cousin, who I guess, you know, we're second cousins or whatever the hell we are now. I remember he was there, and he was older than I was. I think he was 18 or something at the time, so he knew what was going on the screen. And I'm like tilting my head, going, "Huh? What? Like what Well, what am I supposed to interpret here? I get it now, all these years later.
Whenever you talked about Sextras over the years, I'd never seen what it looked like until I just looked it up last night to do our thumbnail stuff.
Oh, yeah. Sure, that's why.
But did you find the proper one? Because there's like the stupid one where it's basically people.
I found whatever Google.
That's not the one.
I found whatever Google image search gave me. Okay, so
I
had always thought that Sextras, and it's so ridiculous. Like the actual pieces were like people. And you were like,
no, there's a game like that. There is a game like that. But no, it wasn't like that. That's not the one that I
thought
played.
the same as you, Swinny. That's what I thought it was.
No. So it's not the one I played.
So kind of just going off that, and we should probably just call out because, for younger listeners, a lot of the stuff in a way doesn't make sense what we're talking about because, when we were growing up, there wasn't the internet as we know it now. And in fact, like there wasn't even the web until like 94. So literally predates the web, a lot of the stuff we're talking about.
None of these games existed. I mean, the internet in one form or another existed.
The internet was there, but not the web.
But the web wasn't. You couldn't get these games or anything. You had to get them off a floppy disk from someone.
And that was that's what I kind of liked about the PC. So I was also heavily into PC gaming and... with the NES, I love the NES, and then, probably won't touch on it, but like the SNES and all that kind of stuff. But that was very like, I didn't know too much about the piracy stuff on those consoles. There were things like the Dr. 64 and stuff like that, but, basically it was like all legit, right? And, with PC on the other hand, it was like, it was crazy. It was just like a free-for-all.
Yeah.
And it was kind of cool because, we would go to like PC swap meets and stuff where you could buy PC parts and people would just like go, here's a disc, $1. Here's like, the game that I'm going to talk about now, which is like Wolfenstein 3D. So, and they had this concept of shareware back then, which in a weird way doesn't even exist today. It's like you do have demos every now and then, but demos are kind of gone out of favor now. I guess games are so cheap these days, but I remember playing Wolfenstein 3D and I got the like shareware version. I think I was sold the shareware version where it was meant to be free, right? And like Wolfenstein 3D, I think even to this day, now that, there are actually sort of like a new series of Wolfenstein games, I still feel like people don't understand its place in gaming and really created the complete bones of the first-person shooter genre. And it was really until Doom came out, which I think everyone regards as the sort of the granddaddy of first-person shooters. The thing about Doom is just the way in the artistry and just the presentation, the sound, the music, it just all took it up another level altogether. So it just became a massive hit. But yeah, just going back to Wolfenstein 3D, I love that game so much.
Yeah.
And I do need to find this and dig this out. But, thanks to my parents for this, but we actually, sent off to Texas to get, and money or something, like a check or something like that, right? To get Spear of Destiny, which is like the sort of spin-off sequel to Wolfenstein 3D. And they sent them from Texas themselves like the actual floppy disks, like hand done.
You know what that reminds me of? And this is obviously slightly later. I got my hands on a copy of Duke Nukem 3D.
Yeah.
And it was actually, it was funny because... I was 13 at the time, I think, 12 or 13. And I walked into the store. I saw the copy. I had played it at my mate's place. And I said, I got to get this game. It's incredible graphically and, all those other things in it. And the guy's like, are you 15? I'm like, yeah, look at me. And lucky I had, a little fluff growing on my chin because I matured earlier than other kids in that sense. So I looked like I was 15. It was fine. And I remember getting home, putting the game in, installing it. And I'm like, where are the titties? Where are the strippers? What's going on here? I've been ripped off.
I wish I could name the episode Where Are the Titties?
So I was sitting there totally confused. And again, no internet. You can't just search and go, where are the titties on the internet? You can't do that. They didn't exist. So I looked at the back of the game because I bought the physical copy, obviously. And I looked at the back of it and it had the local distributor of the game. And it had their contact details. So I'm like, all right, I'll just call them up. So I called up the local distributor of Duke Nukem 3D in New Zealand. And I'm like, hey, I got this game, but it looks like it doesn't have everything. Like it's missing all the textures and sprites and stuff of the strippers and other things. And the lady's like, no worries, we'll send you a patch.
Oh God!
I swear to God, I was like 12, hitting on 13 at the time. They sent me via post a floppy disk with the patch, the adult mode patch for Duke Nukem 3D. The local distributor of the which is like, first of all, they didn't give a shit about my age. They didn't verify anything. They just sent me an envelope with the floppy disk. I put it in, patched the game, bingo, done. That
That's
is
funny.
like, you cannot get that anymore. Something like that does not exist. There is no such thing. That experience cannot be had ever again. So
That's awesome.
back
That's
to
awesome.
Wolfenstein. But yeah, that was so
Yeah,
cool.
no, and then just on that one quickly, yeah, like when I went to a friend's house, I remember which friend it was, and he had a better PC and he had Doom running. And when I first saw Doom, and he got it like really early on, I was like really blown away. I was like, "Whoa, I've got to get this game." I was like
Incredible.
super into it. And maybe I'll throw to you, Swinny, next.
Yeah, so we'll talk about those, different tiers of my childhood gaming. So the Atari, the NES, and then the third one, which is PC gaming. But just before I mention that, I just wanted to give Sega a little bit of love. So I never had a Master System or a Mega Drive, but my friends did. So I used to always, when I went round to their place, play Alice Kid Miracle World. And Hang On and things like that. So the Master System was a big part of my gaming upbringing as well, but also a little bit of Mega Drive. Maybe a bit later, but getting to play games like Streets of Rage 3, Columns, the awesome version of Aladdin on Mega Drive and stuff. But with PC gaming, so my family from memory was one of the first kind of in our area to really get a PC at home. And it was an Amstrad, and I'm not sure, I've gone back and forth. They look very similar. I'm not sure if it was an Amstrad 1512 or 1640 or however you say it. But essentially, it had 4 colors. It had white, black, purple, and teal. And I got to play some absolutely amazing games on it. And this was my first experience using any kind of like DOS style operating system as well. But games like Prince of Persia, California games, Test Drive to Alley Cat, which is amazing.
Oh my God, Alley Cat! I was going to ask you, did you play Alley Cat?
Yes, Alley Cat.
Yes.
Sokoban, which is an awesome.
Oh, Sokoban!
Whizball, Whizball, which isn't a very well known game, but I love Whizball so much. But there was one specific game that I couldn't remember the name of for like 20 years, and I finally found it like recently, and it was called Into the Eagle's Nest. And I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this game, but it was awesome. So it was a top...
It's like some nasty game?
Yes. It was a top-down shooter, like Gauntlet style, where you're escaping from a Nazi prison, and you get revenge, you save prisoners, you unlock doors, eat their food, you collect their gold, and it's just...
Eat the prisoners' food.
The Nazis' food.
Collect the prisoners' gold.
You sound like you're are we the baddies?
Yeah.
Are we the baddies?
But it was... The sound effects of that game are burnt into my brain, and whenever I look it up, like, all of the screenshots look... Because, I was only having that 4-color monitor... It's they
came up all Nazi.
All the images look so much better, like because they're on better machines and stuff. But Into the Eagle's Nest was awesome. But probably the most fond early PC gaming memories for me was for probably one of the best Christmas presents I ever got, which was a Sierra adventure game triple pack that we got for Christmas that had King's Quest 2, Space Quest 2, and Police Quest 2. And
those were amazing.
They were so amazing. And again, we only had that like 4-color one, and so I'd look at the back of the box and be like, "Oh my god, this game looks so much better on these other computers." But like Police Quest 2 especially, such an amazing game, and there's so much I didn't understand at the time, so many of the jokes that I didn't understand, and it was almost like just I learnt so much from that game. It sounds so ridiculous, but it's like watching Pulp Fiction when you're young. You're learning stuff that you've never heard about, and it kind of introduces to you in a way that some people would think is inappropriate. It's like a kid shouldn't be learning. Like with Police Quest, like it's about you're investigating murders, and like it's pretty serious stuff. But it was such an awesome experience. So that is probably those 3 things: the Atari, the NES, and my Amstrad PC were my early gaming memories that I fondly cherish.
I remember because we grew up together, and I remember because I never really got into the sort of point and click adventure games. I never really had them, I should say. But yeah, I sort of did, right? But it was sort of like that back in the day because just because the internet has unlocked so many things, now you can find content that suits you and, you know, YouTube videos and everything like that. Back then, it was almost like just you're picking things at random. It's like, oh, I want to buy this game. I don't really know that much about it. Or I'm reading about it from magazines, but you don't understand as a kid that, by the way, the magazines are getting paid off by the publishers, or they'll have deals, and they kind of have to say this game is good even though it's terrible.
I used to love going into Tandy and seeing the PC games there, you know? Like, Tandy doesn't exist anymore, but that was a thing back then, you know?
Yeah, and like because we're in Australia, it's like kind of odd because we sometimes got stuff from the US that didn't really translate into Europe, and then vice versa as well. So PC gaming and like Commodore 64 was actually super massive when we were growing up. I didn't really see a lot of that just because I saw it at my cousin's house, but we didn't have one. We were always like from the start, like, 286, 386, 486. We were always on like sort of Intel all the way through. So I didn't see a lot of those games. But I always remember Swinny growing up, and you always talk about like Space Quest, Police Quest, all those kind of games. I actually want to play them one day just to see what they're like.
Oh, they're still. I reckon they're still good games to this day. I mean, some of the remakes of some of the classics, like Monkey Island, they were remade relatively recently, and they're totally worth picking up. They're still hilarious to this day, I think.
But the last one that I just wanted to touch on, and then whatever you guys wanted to throw out there was, again, a different sort of format, which was arcade. So I remember, like, because like arcades were much, much bigger when we were growing up, and probably even bigger before our time, but they're still really massive when we were growing up. And for me, like the game that like blew my mind, there's probably two, but one in particular was Street Fighter 2. Like when that first came out and just seeing that and playing it, and it was really like a different thing because arcade games generally up to that point were very solo. Like you're, playing Galaga, Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, whatever it was. This was the first game that I don't want to dox us too much, but, we'd go to like, the local sort of mega sort of mall or like shopping center, like the really, really big one. And they'd have like a playtime. And I just loved how it was like, the rules, at least in Australia, were, and still are, from what I understand, if you're on the machine, so you're playing Street Fighter 2 and you win, it's like you stay on. And if you want, people would put like dollar coins lining them up, and it's like, all right, I'm going to come up next and try to beat you. And if you lose, it's like, well, piss off. You've lost. You have to get off. And I kind of love that competitive element. And there were some people who were so good at those games and plowed in like a lot of money. And then it was basically like they're almost playing for free because people would just come and like lose against them. And it was just something really cool about those kind of arcade memories.
Yeah.
Go Sven.
No, I was just going to say, look, probably this lines up with Smash Bros. A bit, which is funny. One of the fondest arcade games as a very young kid for me was Pac-Land. Like, I loved Pac-Land so much. It is, obviously like games like Street Fighter and that. Like, the first Street Fighter was the game that was actually in the same arcade as I used to play Pac-Land. But that Pac-Land, for some reason, I just love that game. But yeah, it makes an absolutely horrible Smash Bros. Level.
And it's a horrible level as well. And how about you, Mike?
So I was just going to touch on a few games as well. That obviously Doom. I remember when I was living in New Zealand at the time. So again, not doxing myself or anything, but I lived all over the shop, and we had a neighbor that it was kind of crazy. He was really well off at the time, had his own business and stuff, and he lived in the unit next to me. And he got me a copy of Doom. Again, I think I was about 11 at the time or something. And not the kind of game, you probably recommend an 11-year-old, but I thought it was amazing. Such a cool game. So that, and graphically, that just blew me away at the time. So I remember playing that quite a bit as well. And I remember getting my hands on, again, I was actually a legit copy. I saved pocket money to get this, of the original Need for Speed. The very original.
I played the hell out of the one on PC.
Played the hell out of that one, yeah. And I kind of wish I kept the original games. Like, I don't like, I've collected a bunch of stuff in my life, but I actually wish I kept that kind of stuff.
You can't. You're a minimalist.
Well, now I can't, exactly, yeah. And then I remember games like Dune, which and Dune was different than Dune 2. I remember the original Dune, which was kind of more of an adventure kind of game. And then I remember playing Dune 2, which is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the first, or if not, no, it might actually be the first real-time strategy game that was ever made. And I might have to correct myself on the next episode, but it's certainly one of the earliest real-time strategy games. And, that spawned the whole genre of Command and Conquer, which I subsequently played, and all those other games. And there's one game that I highly recommend you give a crack into God if you want to play some adventure games. And I have really fond memories of it. And it was called Darkseid. And it was based on the H.R. Giger artwork. So I don't know if he worked with, I assume he worked with the makers, because he would have done the art. And it's all his art. And it's an adventure game set up in a surreal world with all his art and stuff. And it came out, I think, in 1992. And highly recommend it if you can get it on like just DOS box or something. I don't even know how you'd be able to play it
from the makers of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream.
Did they do that as well?
Yes. I've never heard of that game. That's a similar kind of
scary.
Cyber Dreams.
Yeah, that's
what else
that's a point and click, like a super psychological horror one. So
yeah. They didn't do that many other games since then, unless they got bought out and it turned into something else. But fantastic game, highly recommend it. Really cool, trippy, psychological horror. So yeah, those were like the really early ones. And I think, I don't know if you guys want to continue, but I feel like that's kind of like a summary of the early days, if you could call it that. Because beyond that point, it gets into more modern era where, we can start talking about Unreal Tournament and Quake and the Mega Drive that I had and all that stuff in the PlayStation 1. But I think that's not really early memories anymore.
We can say that
truly established segment by then, which I think we can talk about some other day.
Yeah, no, it was actually really cool going back. And actually, my mum sent me a bunch of photos of like, I didn't send you guys all of them, but it was like me, like as a young kid on a PC and stuff like that. I love like these old school box, beige box PCs and stuff. So
this was when you were still, not to say this in a mean way, but you were short and chubby.
I still am short and chubby.
No, because you went through this.
I'm at least one of those things.
One of those things. Not the short part, let's say. You went through this crazy growth spur when you were in high school. When was it?
You're trying to dox me.
What's its relevance?
How is this? What is anyone gonna do with that piece of information?
I need Phoenix Wright. Objection.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, this has been great, and Intergot for the thousands upon thousands of hours that we've talked about video games and what we grew up playing. The fact that we both learned that we both played Cookie Monster Munch as kids for the first time on this show is a testament to why we did this segment.
We'll have to have it as a thumbnail for the segment. All right, cool. Well, that wraps us up for this week's show.